Now, is there anybody here who's never been to London before? Is anybody here you're here for the first time? Welcome. Why have you never come to London before? It's a beautiful city. Oh, COVID, and also it's quite an expensive city. Now behind the cleanest and the longest and the best bridge over the River Thames, and you will see the London Eye at the west end of London, called the City of Westminster, the new part of London, which was built for royalty. On your right, you will see the east end of London, the City of London, built for commerce by the Romans. You can see St Paul's Cathedral, beautiful St Paul's Cathedral, and all these skyscrapers built in a very strange way, because nothing in London is allowed to be taller than St Paul's Cathedral. For those of you from the UK, on the right, that's the Oxo Tower, which is illegal. You're not allowed to advertise on the River Thames. OXO, Oxo, is a stop you. And a High Court judge believed the lawyer for Oxo when he said, that doesn't say Oxo, it's random shapes, the perfect advertisement. On your right, this is called Somerset House, this white building here, which used to be a palace in the 1500s for Queen Elizabeth I, the second daughter of Henry VIII. If you're looking for somewhere to eat with your family, just sit down at the tables and chairs and nobody will stop you, because nobody owns these tables and chairs whatsoever. In front of you is the Lyceum Theatre, which is showing the most popular musical in the world. Does anybody have a clue what musical has been seen by more people than any other? Cats? No? Go on, say it. Very good, man, very good. The Lion King, just there. Number 1, The Lion King. Number 2, The Phantom of the Opera. Number 3, Les Miserables, which is French for Everybody Dies in the End. And that, thank God for that. So down the Kingsway, you've also got the original London tram lines, how we used to travel around London. On your left, the London School of Economics, where Mick Jagger went to university, but he always used to deny it, because in the 1960s it wasn't cool to have an education. This building on your right is Gringotts Bank, the Australian High Commission, where the Australian flags are. The inside of this building is where they filmed the bank in the first Harry Potter movie. More people have now read a J.K. Rowling book than Charles Dickens. She is our most famous authoress. The second most famous is the woman who wrote that disgusting book, 50 Shades of Grey. Hands up who's read 50 Shades of Grey. No, just me. On your right, this is St Clement's Danes Church. Have a look at the sort of bomb damage done to this church in 1942 when it took a direct hit. On your right, BK News, where Bridget Jones bought cigarettes. On your left is the Royal Courts of Justice, the Civil Court, the Appeals Court. This is where Meghan Markle sued the British newspapers for daring to suggest she was a waste of space. Just an opinion, in the middle of the road, can you see a dragon coming up? London is 2 cities. Right now we're in the new part of London called the City of Westminster. As soon as we pass the dragon, we'll be in the old part of London, built by the Romans, the City of London. So in a moment, everything on your right, as we pass the dragon, will get much, much older. In mythology, dragons guard treasure. On your right, have a look at this old building, 1684. 18 years after everything in London burnt to the ground in the Great Bar of London of 1666. On your right, the Middle Temple Bar, as featured in the Da Vinci Code. You can visit the Knight Templars Church tomorrow, which is just through there. If you could see, just behind this very badly behaved truck, the Old Cock Tavern, this pub here, straight up made of wood, how we used to build buildings 400 years ago in London. On your left, this church is called St Dunstan's in the west. This is the church which woke Ebenezer Scrooge up in A Christmas Carol. And keep looking left to look up. Up, 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 up. See her? Queen Elizabeth I. That's the oldest statue of the second wife of Henry VIII, built during her lifetime in the 1500s. St Paul's Cathedral, it is the People's Church. My American friends, have you seen St Paul's Cathedral yet? It's where you got the idea for the Senate. It's a little bit similar, but we stole the idea from Italy. So we're all magpies. Now this is called Fleet Street. Fleet Street is where all the British newspapers used to be published up to 1980. And when you find newspapers, you find journalists. When you find journalists, you find pubs, because most journalists are alcoholics. Anybody here work in journalism? Just checking. Now, coming up in the right, you'll see a barber's shop, a male hairdresser's shop, called the Demon Barber of Fleet Street, who didn't exist. Do you know the sign for a barber, the red and white pole? That's because in the 1500s, our barbers used to be surgeons. So if you were ill, they used to cut you. So the red of your blood and the white of the bandages. On the right is the Tipperary, the oldest Irish pub in England, the first place in London to sell Guinness. On your left here, on Cheshire Cheese, this is where Charles Dickens, Mark Twain, Dr. Samuel Johnson, Voltaire, and all the great writers used to drink here. If you think it looks dark and miserable, that's because it is. Dr. Samuel Johnson, who wrote the world's first dictionary, used to have his house just behind there. You can actually visit it. This is St Paul's Cathedral. Now, is anybody old enough to remember 1981 that Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer got married here? Just me. I was told about it by my parents because, of course, I'm far too young to remember that. Coming up on your right is the Old Bell Pub, built by the same person who built St Paul's Cathedral, Sir Christopher Wren. This is where the workers used to eat and drink, and that's why it took them 35 years to build St Paul's Cathedral. St Paul's Cathedral is the only cathedral in the world where the architect lived to see the design. And can you see on your right the golden statue of the man carrying a stick? He is called Mr. Punch. It's a children's story. Has anybody heard the story of Punch and Judy? I shall tell you, it's done with puppets at the seaside. Mr. Punch had a nagging wife called Judy. He didn't like this, so he hit her on the head with his stick and said, "That's the way to do it." Mrs. Judy tried to get the crocodile to eat him. He beat the crocodile to death, said, "That's the way to do it." And it kind of goes on. It's the story of domestic abuse. It's quite horrible, but that's a children's story. Now, look back, everybody, and can you see that church spire just up there? Yes? That's called the Church of St Bride's, and that's where they got the Paul's Cathedral are only open for members of the royal family. The steps to the left of the middle doors are where the Feed the Birds, Tuppence a Bag lady sat in Mary Poppins. The Duke of Wellington's buried here, Lord Nelson is buried here, and also Christopher Wren, who designed the church, is buried here. If you go here tomorrow, look for his tomb, and on it in Latin it says, "Gentlemen, if you see one royal, look around you." The statue in front, her name is Queen Anne. She was the Queen of England at the time of the building of St Paul's Cathedral. Now, this is the City of London. What do you notice when you look around? Nobody is here. It's a bit like going to Wall Street at night, sir and ma'am, which means there's no point, nothing's open. So everybody you see, like those two on your left, are lost tourists. Now, and those two on your right, they have no idea where they're going. Now, coming up on your right, you will see a memorial to the fire brigade who saved St Paul's Cathedral during the Second World War, who stood on the steps in between 1941 and 1943 and caught 3 bombs which landed in the crypt. There's the fire brigade. Keep looking right and you'll see a big tall chimney, which is the most popular museum in London. It's called the Tate Modern Gallery, which is full of absolute garbage. Sorry, modern art. And as we pull away, look back at the beautiful dome of St Paul's Cathedral, which is 365 steps feet tall, because Christopher Wren believed that who work here go home, finish work at 3 o'clock. They do one of two things. See if you can guess which one. Do they, number one, go home to their dear wives and children, or number 2, go straight to the nearest pub? What do you reckon, everybody? 1 or 2? Two. How do you know? You're absolutely right, yes. Now, in a moment we're going to see the Royal Stock Exchange. We're going over Tower Bridge. We're going over London Bridge as well. Does everybody know the difference between London Bridge and Tower Bridge? Are you sure? Do you remember Fergie from the Black Eyed Peas did a song called London Bridge and she was twerking away on Tower Bridge? We'll see what I mean in a moment. Down on your left is Mary Le Bow, which is the Church of Bow Bells. If you're born with the sounds of these bells, you're a true Londoner, called a cockney, even though you can hardly hear them anywhere in London. The white building in front of you is the Royal Stock Exchange, where we make all the money in London. can see, you'll see a Dalek, which is actually an air vent for the London Underground. Just there. And coming up on your left is a street called Poultry, where they used to sell ducks and hens and geese. 300 years ago, nobody in London could read. So get ready on the left, onto the traffic lights, look on the corner, and see if you can see a statue of a child strangling a goose. Yeah, do you see him? Can you all see him? Just up there, ladies and gentlemen, just up there, yes? Now, if you're a strict vegetarian, he's stroking it. Let's be honest, he's breaking its neck. But that's how we used to know that this street used to, 300 years ago, sell ducks and hens and geese. On your right, this is called Mansion House, which is the home of the Lord Mayor of London. Two parts of London, so two mayors. The Lord Mayor goes through the world promoting the people of Thomas Manor, left his oven on overnight, it's backwards, when the fire started, having rain. It's got 311 steps to the top, and if you make it to the top, there'll be no certificate saying, well done. You are really stupid. Well done. You made it to the top of the monument. My friends from the UK, Oranges and Lemons said the bells of St. Clements is about that church there. That's called St. Clements Institute. Just go back. There we go. On your left, 321, the monument built to honour the people of London after the Great Fire of 1666. Originally it was going to have a statue of Charles II, who was the man who demolished the houses so the fire couldn't actually spread anymore. He said, if you put a statue of me there, people will think I started the fire. If anybody is in London in April, come to this bridge and you'll see every single marathon runner run on the London Marathon having run 22 miles, going really, really slowly. Right, this is London Bridge. Coming up on your left, oh, you're already seeing the Shard at the back, aren't you? We'll see that in a moment. On your left, Tower Bridge. Half the bridge isn't working at the moment. That light is the bridge which exists London Bridge. It's it rises up to allow ships through with that huge mast showing off millionaires. The ship on your left is called the Belfast. It's captain's the front. So when the dragons are facing towards us, we're approaching the city. When they're looking away, we're leaving the city. And in a moment, on your left, they go, oh, you can already see it at the back, can't you? The tallest building in Western Europe called. Any idea? The Shard. The Shard, designed by Lorenzo Piano of Italy. So if you look up, there's £1 billion. And the only person who can afford one is the architect, Renzo Piano, because he didn't ask for a fire station now converted into a restaurant. And on your left, the glass building is called the Unicorn, which is a wonderful children's theatre. Well, it's wonderful if you like children, anyway. Some people call this hell on earth on performance days. And coming up on your left in a moment, you're going to see a big glass building called City Hall, which is nicknamed the Stack of Pancakes, and it's the headquarters of the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who's in charge of the police and transport. Just this building here on your left, the Stack of Pancakes. Now, this used to be where Boris Johnson had his headquarters. Have you all heard of Boris? Yes? Anybody heard of Banksy? Anybody know who Banksy is? A Banksy, ladies and gentlemen, used to be on this wall on your right, but unfortunately people kept graffitiing over it, so they moved them all to opposite the London Eye. I'll show you at the end of the tour how you can get to see Banksy's for free. Right, let's add to the fact that this is the most photographed bridge in the world. Up to 1952, it used to be controlled by steam, but in 1952, a London bus was going over Tower Bridge, and it started to open with the bus on it, so it had to do a James Bond and leap over. Ever since then, it's been controlled by electricity. As we go into the middle of the bridge, you can still see HMS Belfast, the old warship there on your left, which was actually in 1970s sold for £1 for the Imperial War Museum. On your right, you can see the dockyards and docklands, which are now private apartments. The green one, the glass apartment on the right, belongs to Dame Helen Mirren. the famous British actress. Right now, we're going underneath the Tower Bridge exhibition. Just have a look up, everybody out there, and you'll be able to see the glass partitions, where during the day, people lie down on those partitions, and it looks like when they're taking a selfie, they're falling onto the bridge. If you think of going up there, ma'am, don't wear a skirt. You get real perverts coming up there, usually on this bus. Now, coming up on your left, this is the most interesting thing in London. Has anybody been to the Tower of London? Please do. When you're in London, you've got to visit the Tower of London. It was originally built in 1066 by our original French king, whose name was William the Conqueror, William I, William of Normandy. And it's because of the fact that after him we had 200 years of French kings. We have so many French words in the English language, like banquet and concierge, cul-de-sac, handkerchief, all kinds of things. Anyway, the crown jewels are kept here. The Yeoman Warders, who's the real names of the guards, actually live in those brown apartments. The white apartment is just in front of you. The tall tower you can see is the oldest surviving part of the Tower in London. That's called the White Tower, and that's where people used to be beheaded. The knights used to charge at each other on their horses, knocking each other off. Have you all heard of jousting, yes? They used to hold their lances in their right hand, and they used to pass on the left-hand side of the road, which is why we in the United Kingdom drive on the left, because it's also much safer than driving on the orders of Henry VIII. Do you see that very weird-looking skyscraper on the right, just up there? We call that the walkie-talkie. 5 years ago, on the hottest August day of the year, somebody parked their Mercedes underneath that building. The hot August sun shone off and melted the Mercedes. There's now a metal sheet down the front, but they now nickname that building the Death Ray. On your right, this is a memorial for the 12,000 people who died in the Merchant Navy in the First World War. Because they were buried at sea, all their names are written on this memorial. We are now re-entering the City of London. In front of you on the left, you can see a dragon with the flag of St. George on him, looking towards us, the patron saint of England. The church on your left is the oldest church in London, 605 AD, All Hallows by the Tower. This is where John Quincy Adams, the 6th President of the United States, was married, and where William Penn, the founder of Pennsylvania, was christened. And in the basement, you will find remains of Roman and Saxon artifacts. The top is where the great poet Samuel Pepys stood and watched London burn to the ground during the Great Fire of 1666. The people of London thought they were being cursed by the devil because the year of the fire, 1666, removed the 1666, the number of the beast. This building on your left is called Customs House, which is where goods used to be declared sailing into England. If they didn't declare them, they would have been executed for piracy. And the next left is Billingsgate Fish Market, this building here. We're up to... It has no interest whatsoever to anybody, but historically, it's where the fire accidentally started. The fire only killed 6 people, but it cleansed London of the Great Plague. The church on your left is the most haunted church in London. It's called St. Agnes the Martyrs Church. And where the tree is, look on your left, and you'll see a piece of London Bridge. Just down there on your left, just can't see 3 pieces of the 2nd London Bridge. This is the 9th London Bridge that we're going under now. The previous one having been sold to Arizona. Now there's 32 different parts of London, 32 boroughs of London. This is the London Borough of Southwark, which is actually spelled S-O-U-T-H-W-A-R-K. Our spelling in this country is weird. Get ready on the left because you're about to see a 1,000-year-old church called Southwark Cathedral, where you'll find the grave of Edmund Shakespeare, William Shakespeare's brother. Behind that church, you have the current Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, which was rebuilt in 1997. First one blown up by a cannon. They were doing in the 1500s a performance of Henry VIII and decided, let's let the cannon off indoors. Boom! The second one was pulled down by the Puritans in the 1600s who didn't like theatre. The third one was rebuilt by Sam Wanamaker, the American movie director. This is the most boring bridge in London we're going under now, called Cannon Street Railway. which is quite lovely, yes? Now, if anybody's doing a river cruise tomorrow, let me give you a tip. When you go under Southwark Bridge, don't look left, because just to the left of Southwark Bridge, you have a gentleman's sauna, and you'll see right in, because you know how usually they have the glass done, so that they can look out and you can't look in. They put it the wrong way round. So remember, after Southwark Bridge on the River Thames, don't look left, okay? We're going underground, and when we come out to going underground, we're going to see the Millennium Bridge, originally called the Wobbly Bridge, but it's the bridge which the dragon shook everybody off at the start of the last Harry Potter movie. Stand by, don't get scared. Old, it's called the City of London School. This building on your right is where you'll find the Knight Templars Church, but because they were banned, outlawed in the 1300s, it's now been given to lawyers, the Law Society. On your left is the Sea Containers Hotel. If it's red, the River Thames is extra polluted. If it's blue, the River Thames is not so polluted. It has sensors from that hotel into the River Thames, so it's kind of 50-50 at the moment. There's the Oxo Tower. This road was built in 1859 because the River Thames used to be a sewer. So, to stop the River Thames stinking, they made this road as a sewer, and that's why every single lamppost on your left and right has dolphins on them, fish on them, to show this used to be part of the River Thames. The River Thames used to go all the way up to these buildings on the right. We are now leaving the City of London. So on your left, there's a dragon facing away from us. On the right, there's a dragon facing away from us, back into the City of Westminster, which was built for royalty. This part of London on your left, far the Thames, is called the King's Reach. No member of the royal family is allowed into the City of London without permission from the Lord Mayor of London. All to do with the Magna Carta 1215 and King John being forced to sign a Bill of Rights to stop him taxing British people so much and giving the freedom of the City of London back to the people. Even the Queen has to ask permission to enter the City of London. During her Platinum Jubilee, later in June, she will have to ask permission to go to St Paul's Cathedral. You have more authority in London than the Queen. This building on your right, Somerset House, contains an archway where boats used to go into this building via the River Thames. Remember, the River Thames used to go up to these buildings. Where that archway is there at Somerset House, that's how boats and ships used to get into this building. This used to be a naval office, and this is where Lord Nelson received his final notices for the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805 before going away from London for the final time. This is the Waterloo Bridge here, the only bridge in London to be built by women, and also the only bridge in London to be built on time and under budget. That's a nightclub there, lots of topless dancers in there, sirs and ma'ams, just in case you were wondering. Coming up on your left is the oldest thing in London. It's 3,500 years old. It's called Cleopatra's Needle. It was given to us in 1819 by the then President of Egypt, whose name was Muhammad Ali. That's where the boxer Cassius Clay got his name from. Now the Sphinx, the Sphinxes were put here by the Victorians. The needle is 3,500 years old. Queen Victoria loved this, but there is a mistake. When you're looking at something, which way should be, when you're guarding something, where should you be looking? Outwards. Have a look at the Sphinxes. What's wrong with them? They are gazing at the needle. They put it the wrong way round. See? But Queen Victoria ordered it to be kept like that because she quite liked the look of it. But that's great British technology there, ladies and gentlemen. In front of you is the Queen Elizabeth II Bridge, leading you over on your left to the Royal Festival Hall, which is the home of the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. Go down to that area of London, and they actually tried to stop the London Eye being built in 1999 because they said that spies could go to the top of the London Eye and look into the building with their binoculars, the High Court judge said, don't be so stupid, buy yourself some curtains. On your right, this is New Scotland Yard, the home of the Metropolitan Police, with a famous revolving sign, which only ever stops for 24 hours if a policeman or woman is killed in the line of duty. On your right, this is Old Scotland Yard. This is the Scotland Yard featured in the Sherlock Holmes books, in the books by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. In those days, our British police used to be called bobbies. The British Police Force was founded by Sir Robert Peel, another name for Robert, Bobby. In front of you, the Houses of Parliament, which looks very, very old, is actually only just over 150 years old. 1832, everything burnt here in the Great Fire of Westminster. A member of Parliament was burning ballot papers to rig a result, and so this burnt down. Rebuilt 1861, the current Houses of Parliament, they look 400 to 500 years old because of the old Gothic style. The clock tower on your right, Big Ben, the Elizabeth Tower. Big Ben is the name of the 13.5-ton bell. It hasn't run for 5 years because it's severely rusty. It's called Big Ben because the proprietor of the works, his name was Benjamin Hall, who was a very nasty boss, and he was a big fat man. So when they saw the bell, all the workers said, Benjamin, that looks like you. Thus the fact, Big Ben. Can anybody see the clock tower falling over, by the way? Here's the secret. 20 years ago, they hit the first column of 4 lions, showing off his great bravery. Have a look at their faces. They're based on a Labrador. The person who made them didn't know what a lion looked like, so he copied the back legs and the face of his dog. Have a look at their faces. Can you see they've got their mouths open and their tongues out, and they're asking you to love them? Labrador lions. Don't ask what that ridiculous statue is on your right.
What is that ice cream?
Oh, okay, ma'am, as you've asked. It is supposed to represent the diversity of London. And it is a drone, a cherry, and a piece of cream. Anyway, fine. On your right, this is Canada House, the Canadian High Commission. On your right, Oceanic House, where they sold tickets to the Titanic. On your right, King George III, the last English king of America, before you so cruelly left us. On your right, the Haymarket, and on your right, look up here, you'll see Her Majesty's Theatre, the first place in the world to show the Phantom of the Opera since 1985. It's the only theatre in the world which changes its name according to who's King or Queen of England. On your left, the Institute of Directors. This is where fat rich gentlemen go to get drunk. If anybody wants to meet a fat rich gentleman who won't live very long, hang outside here tomorrow. On your right is Florence Nightingale, the lady with the lamp. This is called the Crimean War Memorial. She is our most famous ever nurse, and her contribution to nursing was telling all her doctors and nurses to sober up and wash their hands before operations. In the 1800s, the water was so bad in London, the only safe thing to drink was beer. So basically, everybody was drunk more or less the entire time. We are now coming up to Piccadilly Circus. Piccadilly is a stiff gentleman's collar gentlemen used to wear in the 1700s. Circus is Latin for circle. It is the busiest part of London. 1.5 million people a day go through Piccadilly Circus with no reason whatsoever, because there's absolutely nothing to do here, apart from sit under a broken statue. These shops on your right are not shops, they're boutiques and salons, which is French for I cannot afford to go in there. Because if you look in, ma'ams and sirs, do you notice there's no prices on there on your left, down Jermyn Street? It's the oldest electronics matrix board in the world, lit up in 1910 on your right. First thing it ever advertised, Coca-Cola. There's Eros, the Greek goddess of love, and this building on your right is called Lillywhites. This is London's top sports store, and this is where you can all go to buy yourself an England football shirt in preparation for Great Britain, England winning the Football World Cup later this year. Just over there, everybody. Maybe. So you get a few bad performances there. Now, this is Piccadilly. This is Piccadilly. We are going down the road called Piccadilly. The best shops in London are here, I promise. On your right is the Gentleman's Outfitters called Cordings. This is owned by the great blues musician Eric Clapton. He bought it in 1982. He came here as a child and could never afford to go in there. So he now is the major owner of that Gentleman's Outfitters. Coming up on your left is St James's Church, the only church Christopher Wren built outside the City of London. And it's the only church in London which allowed the homeless to sleep here on the benches overnight. Hatchard is the next shop on your left, which is where the royal family buy their books. And then this is the best shop in London. It's called Fortnum and Mason's. It's where Her Majesty the Queen buys hampers for all her servants at Christmas time. And it's where we invented a British delicacy called the Scotch egg. Has anybody ever tasted a Scotch egg before? They invented it here. Come in here tomorrow, ask for a beautiful Scotch egg, all warmed up. On your right is very exclusive shopping called the Burlington Arcade. It's a mile of I cannot afford to go here. 1969, Paul McCartney ran the length of here, going, "Ah!" and got thrown out because he used to work round the corner in Savile Row, where the rooftop concert was held. The next left is St James's Street. At the end of this road, you've got St James's Palace. Now, tomorrow morning, get to Buckingham Palace at 10 o'clock, turn right. The second building on your left is called St James's Palace. Well, I'll show it to you, it's down here on your left. That's where the barracks of the guards are. At 10:30, the soldiers will appear and they'll play their music to you. At 10:45, they'll march right past you, as close as I am to you people here, and then you will get some great photographs. Once that is done, go and do something more interesting. Because all they'll do for the next hour is march round in a circle shouting at each other, okay? But if you just want the photographs of the guards, remember, St James's Palace, now St James's Street down here also has the Hatters. Has anybody seen Kingsman? Yeah, the Hatters in Kingsman called Lock & Co is down here. Lock, which is where the royal family buy their boots, and Trumpeton Hill, where the royal family get their hair cut. It's all down this road. And you've also got a few more gentlemen's clubs here, including on the corner White's Club, which is where the Earl of Sandwich in the early 1800s invented the sandwich. So, on your left, that's St James's Palace. Right at the end, it's the oldest palace in the city of Westminster, built by Henry VIII for his second wife. The wife he loved so much, he had her executed. Now, one of the finest hotels in the world in front of you is Hand, because a lot of German and Scandinavian ladies believe the right hand is the love line true to the heart. Coming up on your right is the world's first ever Hard Rock Cafe. It's an American idea, but we actually managed to get it there first. 1971, Eric Clapton wanted a private table, so he sent his guitar to book a booth, and then all his friends like Keith Richards, Paul McCartney started sending their guitars. If you want to go and see the rock and roll memorabilia here, go in the rock shop, where every 20 minutes they'll give you a guided tour from 1 o'clock. You'll see things like Paul McCartney's guitar, Eric Clapton's guitar, Johnny Cash's ukulele, Keith Moon's drumsticks, all kinds of things in there for free from 1 o'clock, okay? And remember, it's the first one in the world, because our rock and rollers of the 1970s was slightly better than Americans, and I'm sure you all agree. Yes. We had the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin and The Who. America had the Osmonds. Anyway, on your right, that is number 1 London. That sandy-coloured house made of a substance called Bathstone is number 1 London. It's where the Duke of Wellington used to live. He defeated Napoleon Bonaparte in the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. Yeah, just go past the palace. On your right is Wellington Arch. Wellington Arch there with the Angel of Peace landing on the Chariots of War.
To get to it.
On your right, this is the Australian War Memorial. And on your left, this is the back gardens of Buckingham Palace. They're changing the guards tomorrow morning. The second wire down is electric, because in 1982, a man called Michael Fagan tried to break into the Queen's bedroom. He jumped over those walls, broke into the Queen's bedroom, sat on her bed, asked her for a cigarette. The Queen said, "Oh yes, young man, I'll just go and get you one." And it took security 17 minutes to rescue her. So guess who was looking for a new job the next day? Precisely. That's why there's an electric wire on the top. Recently, Her Majesty the Queen has declared she's never coming back to Buckingham Palace. So this used to be a hospital on your left. It's the Delaney, where everybody who stays here for around about £5,000 a night gets their own private butler. We're coming down to Kensington, which is very, very unusual. We never come down here usually, but what the hell? At least we'll see Harrods, I suppose. Now, down on your left, this is where all the multi-millionaires live, and it's called Knightsbridge. Roman Abramovich lives down there, the Russian billionaire who won't be in London for very much longer. The white building coming up on your right is the old French embassy. La France Embassy. Qu'est-ce que c'est une maison l'embassy. Yeah, my French is awful. Anyway, that's the old French embassy there. Is Hyde Park to your right, the largest of the 9 royal parks in London. This is where Henry VIII will be able to see Harrods, just down here. The most famous store in the world. There is Harrods. It's the only Harrods store in the world. Just there, all lit up at night. On your left, Harrods. Now on your right, coming up, these are the barracks of the Horse Guards. If you go to Horse Guards Parade, these are the barracks. They've all been members of the British Army for around 5 years, and this is their 6-month tour of duty. So these are their barracks. It looks on your right a little bit like a prison, but these are actually royal barracks where they keep the horses in stables, but we call the stables muses. Muses. Become Kensington Gardens, where if you walk through the trees, walk through the park, you'll get to Kensington Palace, which is the home of Kate and William, and was the beloved home of Princess Diana. And when William becomes king, he'll move to Buckingham Palace, and George will probably move into Kensington Palace. More embassies on your left. This one here was previously the Iranian embassy. So a lot of the British embassies are in this part of London. In front of you is the Royal Albert Hall, the beautiful, gorgeous Royal Albert Hall. Founded by Prince Albert, it has the worst acoustics in the world. They reckon that when you play a concert here, you hear it back. And every single summer, they hold classical concerts here called the Proms. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Proms. They're called the Proms because people watching them used to walk around the arena. Promenade, prom, prom, prom. Around here, you had the house around this part of London for years. The Green Hut on your right is a resting place for taxi drivers, and that's where, in the 1800s, they used to feed the horse. The taxis used to be pulled round by a horse. They used to be called Hansom cabs, and it's still the law of London that every single London taxi has to have a bale of straw in the back to feed the pony. It's one of those laws, they've never changed. So you've got all the old-fashioned Victorian houses which used to have up to 5 servants per floor. Downstairs where the basement is where the servants used to be, because that's where the kitchens were. And right at the top, where the windows are really small, is where the nursery was, and the children were looked after most of the day by a nanny, and they were allowed to come down and see their mum and dad for around 5 minutes a day. Which sounds about right. Maybe. Now this is the French region of London. This is where most of the French expatriates choose to stay. There's lots of French restaurants and French bookstores. Fair Maison, for instance. private garden for all the houses round here without their own gardens. If you remember the movie Notting Hill, you remember Julia Roberts and Hugh Grant breaking in to a private garden. They're all called garden squares. Everything you see around here, though, is privately rented. It's all owned by the richest family in London, the Grosvenor family. He is known as the Duke of Westminster. He is richer than the Queen. He has more land, and it was all inherited in the 1700s. It all used to be marshland, and that was the start of modern London as we know it today. And just round the corner to the right of Harrods, you have the Ecuadorian embassy, where Julian Assange was holed up for 8 years. Okay, so most of the shops on Sunday are only open in London for 6 hours. Tomorrow they'll be open for around 8 hours, opening around 9:30. And then some very exclusive high fashion designers on your right. Of Harrods.
No.
They forgot to put their clocks back an hour, forward an hour. Very expensive, exclusive casinos here. The only way to keep going all night. You can stay up as long as you like, as long as you keep spending there. After a 50-mile journey from the city of Oxford. Coming up on your left is Achilles. That statue there is the, it's the first naked statue in London. Can you see it? Just about there. On your right is the London Hilton Hotel, the first building in London to be built taller than St Paul's Cathedral. On top, it's got aerials connected to MI6, the British Secret Service. The building lit up in orange on your right is the London Playboy Club. The London Play... I have no idea how I know that. It's just something I know. I do apologise. Now, this is the only road in London with 2 speed limits. Over on your right, because they're near buildings, it's 30 miles per hour. Because here we're near a park, it's 40 miles per hour. On your right is the Dorchester, one of the most expensive hotels in London. It's where Taylor Swift and Bradley Cooper stayed together when they were promoting a movie and started a lot of rumours about them, which I'm sure weren't true. But everything you can see on your right, leased and rented from the Duke of Westminster. Now up here at the top you have Marble Arch, which, Marble Arch used to be in front of Buckingham Palace. Queen Victoria hated it so much that she had it moved here. Marble Arch. She was a very clever woman, and she had a carriage built which was too big to fit through it, so they had to move it here. Coming up on your right, after these trees, is the Animals in War Memorial, showing you the history of all the cats, dogs, animals which took part in World War II. One side, they're weighed down by a gun carriage, so it's quite sad. The next side, it depicts the war is over, and the horse and the dog are running free. There's Marble Arch in front of you. This area on your left is called Speaker's Corner, where every single Sunday people stand on soapboxes making speeches. If you disagree with them, you can heckle them. That is one of the joys. Now round the corner we have the largest shopping street in Europe. It's 1.5 miles of non-stop women's clothes shops, including 52 shoe shops. It's called Oxford Street, and there's only one pub. Roads to your left lead you down to a part of London called Notting Hill, which is famous for its carnival every August, the worldwide Notting Hill Carnival. Oxford Street was originally called Tyburn Way because it was the road to the gallows. So, Oxford Street, straight in front of you, on your left, this is called Tyburn. Where that metal sign is, that's where the gallows used to be, where up to the 1800s people were publicly executed there for crimes like stealing a loaf of bread. Or the worst thing we used to hang people for was attempting to commit suicide and drive one of them carefully or properly. And there's no point getting an Aston Martin in London because the average speed of traffic is 7 miles per hour. So a few more hotels, a few more buildings on your left, owned by the Duke of Westminster, old-fashioned Victorian buildings. Every time they do a movie premiere or interviews for movies, they hire out the second floor of the Dorchester Hotel just here. Now the most expensive hotel in London is actually being renovated. It's owned by the evil man, the Sultan of Brunei. It's the hotel that Elton John said he will never ever stay in, with prices averaging around £25,000 a night per room. I would not recommend staying in this one just over here, even though they're renovating it at the moment. This is the most expensive hotel in London. Maybe it'll never open again, who knows? So this is the London Playboy Club. This is the London Hilton Hotel, just coming up on your left. This is where the politicians go and get drunk. In this place you have a bell called the division bell, which is a bell which rings in 2 places at the same time. When it's time for the politicians to go and vote, ding ding in the pub, ding ding in the Houses of Parliament, and you see them. Now the sandy coloured building on your right is Westminster Central Boys School, and this is where in 1968 Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice first performed Joseph and his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Above the entrance of Westminster Abbey, above the arch, look for the figures dressed in white. Those are people who died for their faith in the 20th century. You see the figures? 5th one along, child at his feet, neck sticking out, Martin Luther King Jr. The reason why he's there is because to become a saint you need to be dead for 400 years. So in 346 years, Saint Martin Luther King, as depicted on the back of Westminster Abbey. That's quite special. In here you'll find the graves of Elizabeth I, Charles Dickens, Isaac Newton, Samuel Johnson. Falling ever so slightly to the right. What do you reckon? Yes? No? Maybe? Maybe? Yeah? Kind of? Yeah? Maybe? What do you think, ladies and gentlemen? No? Yes? It is. I promise you it is. It'll take 4,000 years till it reaches the same level as the Leaning Tower of Pisa, so don't worry. On your right, this is called St Thomas's Hospital, and this is where Florence Nightingale, the lady with the lamp, used to work. That's why they call the nurses here Nightingales. Right now they're building a statue of the Jamaican Florence Nightingale, whose name was Mary Seacole, who did just as much as Florence Nightingale, largely forgotten, now being remembered. There is a museum of nursing here at birth in the 1800s to all 9 of her children. In those days it used to have 25 beds for the whole 1 million people who in those days lived in the city of Westminster. Nowadays it's 8.5 million. If you want to see where the Banksy Bridge is, that's just over here on the right, ladies and gentlemen. Just up there is where all the famous graffiti artists work. Banksy, just there, you can go and see it. There's no problem. If anybody needs a bathroom, go into Waterloo Station over the road, otherwise just barge into that pub and demand to use the bathroom. Tell them you're pregnant. The law of England states that if you're pregnant, they cannot refuse you to use the bathroom. Good luck with that, gentlemen. So, anyway, we are just going to stop here. If anybody needs something to eat, there's a couple of nice restaurants just down there behind us, including a tapas bar open till 11 o'clock and also a bar and grill down there. Otherwise, if anybody wants the London Underground, you go straight up